Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 106 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Mike Koomar is with me. And Mike, we've got some NCAA tournament games to recap, round of 32 this weekend, and then we'll preview the Sweet 16. There is a ton of other news going on, transfer portal, coaching carousel. We're going to focus on that in another video because that would get us to an hour really quickly. But Mike, it was a round of 64. That Joe and I recapped on Friday night, and Saturday and Sunday. What were your overall thoughts of the round of 32?
I think my overall thoughts and some broader takeaway is we're starting to see how NIL is affecting college basketball. This is the first year, I think, since the expansion of the tournament to 64 teams that we did not have any teams from a not major from a is pretty disappointing, I think. And you're starting to see how revenue sharing and things like that are about to change college basketball, and I think that's a big concern of mine. Now, going back, take away from the games, I think one we saw battle-tested teams were able to advance. Right, we look at Arkansas; they're a 10 seed. They're battle-tested because they went through the grit of the SEC regular season. They lost some games. They lost a lot of games, but we started to see them kind of pick up steam coming into March. And I'll be honest, I don't think the result against St. John's shocked me. I had them winning in the first round against a fledgling Kansas team, and I don't think that was unexpected just because of the experience on that team and their ability to be able to play through some pretty tough circumstances. Um, Going to the other side of the bracket, I was very surprised to see Kentucky get to the round of the Sweet 16, get out of the round of 32. They were able to do it just by shooting the daylights out of it in early the second half and kind of hanging on at the end. I don't think they were a much better team than Illinois, but they were able to shoot incredibly, which I don't know if they're going to be able to do going down the stretch. And then keep it on going up. It's kind of a lot of what we expected. I don't think BYU winning was unexpected. I had that in my bracket. So it seems like a lot of what we anticipated, and being, the status quo of most people in college basketball that followed it this season, we're kind of getting the March that doesn't have any madness. And I think a large part of that is because of NIL, what I talked about earlier. We could do a much longer podcast about that later, but clearly NIL is affecting college basketball in a major way.
Yeah, it's a sort of probably an off-season video why this is happening. The top teams
Yeah.
are significantly better than they have in
Yeah.
previous years. Just look at Ken Pom, for example. Look at the net rating. And I looked the other day, Ole Miss, for example, 21st in Ken Pom right now. They'd be top 10 every other year that the database was kept. So when the better teams are all way better than they usually are, you have a couple of
Yeah.
the talented players off the mid-major teams. This is why we have what we do. But I'm switching up the Saturday results right now. A couple of them were flipped. But as I fix that, Mike, let's go into Saturday's action. We started off with Purdue over McNeese. They punched them in the face pretty quickly, and this one wasn't really much of a contest.
Yeah, I think it became pretty apparent. And look, no disrespect to McNeese. Um, they barely beat Clemson after Clemson only scored 13 points in the first half, right? They fell apart pretty hard in the second half. And look, there was a lot of hype, a lot of noise around the McNeese team, which probably affected their ability to play basketball. But at the end of the day, I think we got to see that they probably beat Clemson because Clemson had their worst game of the season. If I'm being honest. And that's no disrespect to what Will Wade's been able to do at McNeese. He's done an incredible job, and he'll go on to do great things at NC State. But they played a better Purdue team, who showed that they were better right from the get-go. Purdue punched them in the mouth early, and even though this was a 14-point loss, it never felt like it was even close to that. This was a 20-plus point game the entirety of the way. Purdue dominated McNeese.
This was
So,
one where Purdue, I think people could have seen them getting sucked into a little bit of a close game here, but
yeah.
their role players stepped up, they pulled away, and this thing was not as close as the score indicated. All right, game two here on Saturday, Mike, was the game that shocked just about everybody. We had John Calipari and Arkansas knocking off Rick Pitino and St. John's 75-66. The Razorbacks were not necessarily dominant here, but it felt like they were in control a majority of the way. A couple St. John's runs pulled them closer late, and it's Coach Calipari who gets to the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2019, and then his old team also gets to the Sweet 16 in the first year post Calipari. So
yeah, mutually beneficial, I
yeah,
would say,
very
for both
much
of
so.
them. I think a lot of people weren't expecting Arkansas to get in, but like I said, battle-tested team, and St. John's did not have their best stuff. Luis in this game, a lot of controversy on why he was pulled he's pulled down by two, one of their probably their second best player on the team, with 3.5 minutes to go, did not close out the game, and that's kind of when St. John's lost. But at the end of the day, he was 3 of 17 from the field that day, and he just did not play good basketball. And so that's why he was pulled. I think he had 9 points in that game. He's their leading scorer. Kadari Richmond, 2 of 7. He only had 5 points, and he only played 16 minutes in that one. So St. John's picked the wrong time to play some of their worst basketball of the season. And it's really disappointing. I was really hoping to see more out of the Johnnies. I think that would have been a great run. I think college basketball is a lot better when New York's team is running through March, which doesn't happen that much. But yeah, I mean, Patino's squad really just fell flat at a very bad time after they had been so good this season. And I don't think this is an indication. I think it's a little different at ACC and the Big East. The Big East is not going to be playing any more basketball this year. Um, I think they had teams that, one, played really well and could get the job done, like UConn on Sunday, but two, teams that just played their worst basketball at the wrong time of the season in the case of St. John's. So
Yep.
disappointing, I think, really, for St. John's.
Yeah, they clearly didn't have their best stuff. 2 for 22 from 3, something that's been a weakness of theirs all season. It hasn't mattered. And it's not as if Arkansas lit it up either offensively. They were 2 of 19. They made 25 twos compared to just St. John's 19 twos. And then it was just a 22-19 advantage on the free throw line for St. John's. But this was a game that both teams weren't shooting it well. They're both very physical. They both sort of had to pound it right at the rim. And there were a lot of whistles. I think almost all of them were fouls. We had a lot of foul trouble in this one.
Fouls come down the stretch.
Arkansas was in real trouble if this thing could have gone to overtime. They had Brazil playing the 5 for some of it. Ivisic fouled out with like 11 minutes left. Adu had 4 fouls. This was a
Ivisic only played 10 minutes in this game.
This was a very much a puzzle piece game from Calipari, and at the end of the day, Janelle Davis makes a big shot. I thought Boogie Fland was really important. He wouldn't look like it on the box score. 2 of 8, 1 of 5 from the field, from 3. But 6 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists in 20 minutes. Like, I thought he was the difference. Defensively, he did a lot of things well. Had a steal. Didn't turn the ball over at all. But it's a team, Mike, at the beginning of the year who would not have been shocked at all if they made the Sweet 16. But based on how it's went, this is not the usual path for a Calipari team to get to the second weekend.
Yeah, in late January, if you said that
we're down
Kentucky
and out
was getting to the Sweet 16, we would have said you were crazy. Maybe they'll get to the Sweet 16 of the NIT. But absolutely, this is kind of reminiscent of a Kentucky team. I can't remember the year, but underperforming team. I think it was around 2013, 2014. They ended up getting a 9 seed, and they ended up going to the championship game in March. Not expected to be high expectations going into the year, fell flat during the regular season, but then came together in March. And this is kind of reminiscent of this Calipari squad. It's funny how some of Calipari's deep tournament runs have been with not his best regular season teams.
And he was pretty, at the beginning of the year, he said he wanted to keep 9 rotation players, 9 scholarship players, because he didn't want to develop, players for other teams. They have the running on the bare bones of a basketball team right now with the injuries and the lack of depth.
Yes.
And it almost cost them here, but it didn't, because they had enough from Billy Richmond, a freshman off the bench, and they get across the line here. And with some rest now, Mike, I think they could keep winning, but we'll get to that later. Let's keep rolling through the games. We've got Michigan against Texas A&M, one of the biggest turnarounds in a half that I think I've seen all year. Texas A&M stretched the lead to double digits with
Yeah.
14 minutes left, but it was a complete flip of the script by the Wolverines. 41-16 run down the stretch for Dusty May's ball club, and it's the Michigan Wolverines who move on to the Sweet 16, 91-79. What about that?
Yeah, shout out Joe Mead. I will say, with about 13 minutes to go in this game, I thought it was over. Right, I thought A&M had punched their ticket to the Sweet 16. They were going to take on Auburn, and morale was going to be high in College Station. And boy, was I wrong. That turned around real quick. And all of a sudden, with about 5, 6 minutes to go, you're like, Michigan has this in the bag, and A&M starts to come back. This was really a back and forth game. You're going to see that it was a 12-point win for the Wolverines. It didn't look like that. It didn't look like that the most of the way. But Michigan's ability to work the ball inside, both with their guards and with their forwards coming down the stretch, was huge in this game. They had enforced their will upon A&M. They were a lot more physical. They out-rebounded, out-possessed, and did not turn the ball over coming down the stretch. So that's why Michigan won this game. They were just physically more dominant over what we thought was a battle-tested SEC squad. It was
There's
really
not
surprising. I was shocked.
the +9 rebound margin for Michigan was very surprising for me. I didn't
Yeah.
really see that. Wolf and Golden did struggle against UC San Diego. They 23 and 12 for Golden, 14 and 9, and then 4 assists for Wolf. And then Roddy Gale off the bench, 26 points. Mike, he earlier this year was sort of unplayable with how he was just not
Yeah.
playing well. He was bad. He was sort of a liability out there, and him and Trey Donaldson have sort of resurrected their seasons with this stretch, Big Ten tournament and now NCAA tournament. But when you look at Roddy Gale's stats in the future from this year, you'll think, 9 points a game, 3 rebounds. That's not going to tell the story. Nobody is going to remember how bad he was in the regular season if he
Yeah.
continues playing like this. But that is the difference. Their forwards have been good all year, but it's the guards who got them across the line here.
Absolutely. And their guards were just able to get down low. It was incredible how much better they were than A&M. Look, we'll get to this in a little bit. I think Michigan absolutely has a chance to knock off Auburn in the Sweet 16. I think there is a good chance of that happening. But it's funny. I think looking back, what we thought, Sean, we knew that Michigan was a good team. Coming off a short rest, though, playing in altitude against a really good UC San Diego team, I had UC San Diego winning, and it wasn't against anything against Michigan. It was just the circumstances of that time. But once they could get past the first round, this team could absolutely get to the Final Four.
There's
100%.
everything went against them, from the draw to the matchups to the Thursday,
Yeah,
Saturday rather than Friday, Sunday. They had a team that turned the ball over at the highest rate in the country, and then they have a team that rebounds at the highest rate in the country. They won both of them.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. So you got to tip your hat off to Dusty May and getting his squad ready to play, man. It's impressive. And we knew that was going to be a tight game. They found a way to get the job done coming down the stretch, and they're in business right now in March. They absolutely have a chance to get to the Final Four.
All right, up next, Mike, we've got Drake against Texas Tech. Obviously, Drake, their team and coach is going to be a whole lot different next year with Ben McCollum going to Iowa. But Texas Tech here, sort of a little bit less of the disparity to the degree of Purdue McNeese, but Texas Tech was pretty much the better team for all 40 minutes here. They led by 7 at halftime. I don't really think they let it get within 4 or 5 in the second half, and it's Grant McCaslin at Texas Tech who are moving on to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, kudos. We saw them, I think, in early March and in late February struggle to close out games. They had no issue here against Drake. I think key to this one is Texas Tech really set the tempo. Look, Drake likes to play a really slow tempo game, really slow, and they were able to get Missouri completely off their game in the first round. Not so much with Texas Tech. They were Texas Tech dominated them on the boards, +8 rebounding. JT Toppin was great in this game. And look, at the end of the day, Texas Tech was a much better team with JT Toppin and Williams going 25 and 28 points. They never looked like they had a chance to lose this game. So kudos to the Red Raiders. They are going to continue to play. And for Drake, it's going to be another season where they got to kind of completely change their identity. So hope they can do it.
All right, up next, Mike, we've got Auburn and Creighton. The Tigers move on 82-70, but this is one where Creighton certainly battled for most of this one. They knocked down a ton of threes early. They actually led at halftime, and probably for 3/4 of this game were right in it. But
Yeah.
Auburn proves to be too much. Just 13 twos from Creighton. I think Auburn's 2-point defense is very good, and I think Bruce Pearl said this in his mid-game interview, media timeout interview. They can't beat us from two. They just got to stop making threes. And
Yeah.
while that continued for most of the game, it didn't for the entire game, and Auburn ends up with a 12-point victory.
Yeah, Janiah Broome was really, really mitigated in this game by Kalkbrenner. Kalkbrenner had an outstanding defensive game. Broome only had 8 points, was 4 of 13 shooting. He had 12 rebounds, but at the end of the day, the rebounding was only +3 Auburn. So from that metric, they were close. And look, if Creighton ends up shooting 50% from 3-point range, or should I say over 50%, if they're 14 of 27, this is a different ballgame. At the end of the day, they battled until probably the last 5 minutes is when it was kind of the beginning of the end for the Jays, but they played some outstanding basketball in this one. Yeah, kudos to McDermott's squad for playing a great game, but at the end of the day, Auburn, they're just the better team,
Yeah.
and even though the Creighton Jays threw their best at Auburn, Auburn was able to withstand that.
I think Auburn has actually played pretty poorly for their standards
And
in these first two games, and I think
I think
they.
that's going to be really key for Auburn down the stretch to be able to close out.
Do we have you, Mike?
Yeah, their best ball.
Do we have you? Little
You hear me?
connection issues, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got some of that, but I think Auburn's not going to be too happy with these two performances, and
Yeah.
maybe that's a little bit of motivation to bring it in the Sweet 16 against Michigan. But
But
at the end
Auburn
of the
hasn't played
day,
their best ball in over a month.
yeah, at the end of the day, they
So,
still won. So,
but that's why I think Michigan has a real good chance.
and that'll be we'll be in Georgia, which is very much expected to be a pro Auburn crowd,
For Auburn
but
crowd.
that works against you when you're losing in an elimination game sometimes. Not usually, but Michigan makes
Yeah.
a couple shots early, and who knows
Yeah.
what happens. All right, let's move on to BYU and Wisconsin, one of the games of the tournament. We're going to be saying that a couple more times coming up, but BYU leads for most of this one. It looks like Wisconsin's kind of down and out. A pretty ferocious comeback late to make this thing a game, but it is Kevin Young and the Cougars who move on to the Sweet 16 despite John Tanji's 37 points. But Mike, some people predicted BYU would win this, but they've played pretty well these two games.
Yeah. One of these things, if you said BYU was going to be the Sweet 16 a month and a half ago, people would have said you're crazy. And then they've gone on a pretty historic run through the Big 12 and in through March now to get to the Sweet 16. Look, favor of the Cougars, that kind of guided them to victory. But at the end of the day, they dominated this game. The Badgers had a hell of a comeback there far. Unbelievable individual effort by him. But, at the end of the day, a short-handed post ejection break first time in I don't know how long. So kudos to the Cougars, Sean. I'm curious what you thought about some of those calls coming down the stretch about Wisconsin.
That the ejection, that is how the sport has been officiated this year. We've had a couple of
Yeah.
calls like that in the Big Ten where it's pretty clearly not intentional, but that's kind of just the rule. I'm glad it didn't cost BYU down the stretch. But, this was a game where BYU has sort of like Arkansas, Mike, they've completely flipped the script. They were out of the tournament, won a bunch of games in a short stretch, and they were one of the hottest
9-10.
teams coming in. They didn't have to play a ton of games in the conference tournament. They won one, lost one. And they were probably the most likely team to get to the Sweet 16 out of that pod. It was a pretty good effort from Wisconsin, too. I mean, John Tanji,
Yeah.
Big Ten Player of the Year runner-up, 37 points. And, Wisconsin ends up with a lot more free throws. I mean, the game was a couple days ago. I don't remember exactly if, that they were warranted or not. But BYU's offense is about as modern as it gets. They have a number of different options. Richie Saunders is sort of the player that ends up he's gotten to a place where he is now probably the best player on the team, but he does all the little things too that the role players do off the bench. He gets those putbacks, he 7 rebounds, and he had 6 offensive rebounds of those 7. So he's the missing piece for me. They've got the NBA talent. Yegor Demin. They've got the role players in Mawat Mag, Trevin Nell, Dallin Hall, and it looks like that Saunders might be the piece that pulls them all together. But, Mike, I think the Final Four might be their ceiling. They have enough talent to beat anybody in the country, I think.
Yeah, no, they absolutely have enough talent to go head to head. Look, they're gonna have to make a lot of shots, and I think that's going to be a tricky matchup to go up tempo with an Alabama team that they do up tempo better than anybody else in the country. But I do think they have the talent to be able to get it done. It's just a matter of do they have the athleticism to compete with Alabama.
All right, well, let's wrap up Saturday, Mike. We have Houston over Gonzaga in a game that ended up being pretty close, but Houston led for most of the way, and then Tennessee over UCLA was pretty much the same way. The higher seed controlled it for most of it, and while certainly they didn't dominate, it would have been a pretty tragic collapse late to lose it. But Houston and Tennessee, yeah, they were close, but I think down 3, yeah, they had a shot, a Khalif Battle shot. Hold on. Our audio's still coming through, but the Zoom is not coming through on the YouTube. But you can talk through this one as I try and figure this out.
Yeah, so Gonzaga, I mean, they were dominated this entire game until the last 5 minutes, and they were finally able to kind of come together at the end, force some Houston turnovers, which is a little bit uncharacteristic. And Houston also missed some free throws, which is very unexpected. I think LJ Cryer missed a couple. Kind of able to hang on, but this was not a convincing closeout of the game by Houston. Gonzaga could have stolen one here, which would have been pretty incredible and would have been a shocking upset if it did happen. But 100%, there was a second in there where I thought Gonzaga could do it.
All right, Mike. Well, let's turn the calendar to Sunday. We had a bunch of good games here, starting off with UConn and Florida. And looked like Dan Hurley and the Huskies were going to pull off the upset for a majority of this one. But a couple of just true dagger march guard moments from Walter Clayton gets the Gators across the line here. UConn had a real chance to win this one, but again, clutch guard play is what gets you across the line in March, and that's what Florida did.
It's funny. UConn won the offensive rebounds battle, but down the stretch, the second and third chance points that turned into dagger threes for Florida, that's what did him in. If UConn could have gotten their offensive rebounds coming down the stretch, and a couple times Florida missed their free throws and got the offensive rebound, and they got 2 points off of that. But that happened 2 times. And that right there is the game, right? They lost by 2, but Hurley obviously felt pretty slighted by the officiating. There were a couple of tough calls. I don't think officiating's been very good in March, I'll be honest.
I think it's been better than the regular season, but I don't know if that's saying much.
Man, I could get on a soapbox. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered in the Baylor game, but I could get on my soapbox about the officials in that one. My goodness. But he did not feel very strong in support of the officials. But yeah, it really felt like for a long time this was UConn's game to lose. And unfortunately, they could not close it out, could not get rebounds, and couldn't stop these dagger threes from Florida.
And a casual watcher of the sport would watch this and think, oh, UConn's great defensively. They just didn't make any shots. They were really poor defensively this year. They ranked in the 80s in KenPom. this is a defensive performance, Mike, that was above their level this year. So obviously, Hurley, they won 13 NCAA tournament games in a row. They need to take some defensive lessons from this one that if they can do this most of the time during the season, they're not going to be in the 8-9 game.
Yeah.
So that's what my takeaway from this one is had we seen this UConn team all year, they're probably a protected seed. They're probably, getting to the Sweet 16, but they probably played the best team in the country here. And Walter Clayton is, he made some NBA level threes there, as Hurley mentioned in the post game after. While he got in the press conference, he was a little bit calmer and was very complimentary of Florida.
Yeah,
But
he did calm down a little bit in the press
I
conference,
do
but
think the
he
Gators were
issued a stark
lucky.
warning to the Baylor Bears, and
Yeah,
oof,
and well, that didn't. It really kind of came to fruition, but
it
Florida
kind of
gets
did.
away with one here.
They
They
just, oof,
they were
yeah,
losing for a majority of this game, and it looked like the pressure was on them. It looked like they were the defending champions, Mike, playing with the pressure. And it took a couple of really big shots for them to look like they played as free and easy as they have all year.
yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll see what happens, but that was a really shaky performance by Florida. I like their chances to get to the Elite Eight. We'll talk about it, but man, that didn't feel too good.
All right, up next, Mike, game after in Raleigh was Duke and Baylor. It was close
Mm,
early. Baylor was hanging for about 15 minutes, but
yeah,
sort of a lack of depth across the front line. Norchad O'Meara gets his third foul early or not early, but in the first half, and
yeah,
Duke goes on a monster run that ends up deciding the game. But Mike, I think we'll do our Baylor season recap video when the season's over. But it seemed like that this was as far as they were going to get with this roster. They get an NCAA tournament win. They play
yeah,
one of the best teams in the country in a heavily, you know,
yeah.
tilted crowd towards Duke. And the reason why Duke's a one seed is because they are able to take you down when your best players aren't in there. But Baylor
Yeah,
ends up losing pretty heavy.
a pretty concerning season for the Bears, disappointing season. It comes to a close, and I think there's a lot of concern around Baylor Nation right now on where the program is going after getting knocked out in the round of 32 4 straight seasons. Some programs would wish to do that, but after winning a national championship, that hurts a little bit. Look, at the end of the game, at the end of the day, Baylor was never going to win this game. They hung tight. They even had a lead at times with in the first 15 minutes of this game. And officiating was not going to decide this game, but
It
it
ended
made
it a
sure
little
that this
quicker
game
than
was
it
a
probably
blowout.
should, though.
It was abysmal.
Yeah.
It was one of the worst officiating jobs. And until the last 5 minutes, the free throw discrepancy was 23 free throws attempted by Duke and 4 by the Baylor Bears. They got a little bit more coming down the stretch when it was over, but the foul discrepancy was disgusting. You also saw the flagrant one called on the Brovicic.
Yeah,
Total
there's
nonsense. That was Bush League call right there by the officials. But look, at the end of the day, Duke was a much better team, and they proved it. Cooper Flag went out with 2 fouls, and Duke did not skip a beat. For the Bears, it's the same story that they've had this entire year. Injuries have kept them to having not a deep roster at all, and so they struggle with the guys that they had. And when O'Meara came out, yeah, it was over for the Bears after he got his third foul. That was the beginning of the end. So you got some talent on that roster. Some of it's already gotten in the portal. Langston Love's already going to be gone. You hope you can keep Robert Wright and then get some good talent if you're the Bears because they're not going to have much to work on with their current roster coming into next season.
yeah, Roach and O'Meara out of eligibility. Edgecombe is definitely going to the NBA draft.
Yeah,
Wright,
Celestine's gone.
Celestine is out. Love is in the portal. I think Wright is probably, I don't know, you'd know better than me, but coin toss to go to the draft. Maybe a little less
Yeah,
than the coin
he's
toss.
he's he's got to stick around. I think he's got to stick around. He's a
He
6'1" guard. Like
he had a tough game here too, but he had a great season. I don't really
yeah,
know if anybody expected this in year one from Robert Wright.
no, I don't think so. I think Wright's going to stick around. At the end of the
He
day,
probably should. It could be his team next year.
it would be his team next ye's he's just makes some really he made some freshman mistakes a lot of times this year, and his play was inconsistent. With that being said, like he way outperformed expectations of him this year. He took the point guard job from Jeremy Roach, who's a 5-year starter in college basketball, and that says something. So Wright will be an NBA prospect, I think, later on, just not right now. He's too short, and he still needs to work on his craft a little bit.
All right, up next, Mike, we had St. Mary's against Alabama, and the Gales hung tough here for about the same amount of time that Baylor did. Alabama goes on a run to end the first half. They go up 13, and then St. Mary's is not able to get it really close. I think 6 or 7 they got it to in the second half. But Alabama, after quite the scare against Robert Morris in the round of 64, they do take care of business here and book their spot in the East Regional.
Yeah, I mean, same thing, right? Alabama was able to control the tempo once they went on that run, and they were able to maintain. We knew that if St. Mary's got down in this game, they would not be able to come back, and they got in a hole. They were resilient. They kind of fought, edged back and forth, but Alabama, clearly the better team. They shot 52% from the field. This was their game to lose, and they're going to roll on into what I think is a very favorable matchup for them against Brigham Young.
And let's just talk about St. Mary's here for a second, Mike. They finished the year 29-6. Obviously, the slow tempo is something that's not been new for them, but they're like genuinely a terrible 3-point shooting team. And for them to get this far, if you're in low possession games and good defensively, like the way that those teams are good is they hit their threes, because it's just a possession math thing that they seem to have found their level. They seem to get to a point every year where they can definitively say that they were beaten by a better team. I think Randy Bennett's not. He'll probably stay there for the rest of his career, but
Yeah.
it's a couple years in a row, Mike, where St. Mary's I think can pretty confidently say that they did all they could in that season.
Yeah, I mean, an incredibly impressive season. We've seen this a
What
lot from Randy Bennett's squad. I guess the question, and Randy Bennett, he will probably never leave St. Mary's, but will they ever break through um, to get to the Sweet 16? They've outperformed Gonzaga the last 2 years in the regular season. They won the West Coast Conference regular season back-to-back seasons. Yet, and part of this was a bad draw, right? If they beat Gonzaga in the championship game, they probably get like a 6 seed. They may even get a 5 seed. And they've got a lot better draw, a lot better chance to make it to the Sweet 16. But will St. Mary's ever be able to get to that next step?
I
Um,
I think for me it comes with non-conference scheduling, and
it does.
and
And they've built up the credibility now. Last couple of years, they've been very undervalued in the non-conference. They were not ranked either time. But will St. Mary's be able to compete in the NIL era continuously to get talent, retain that talent, and then will they be able to score the non-conference schedule that Gonzaga has? Because they still don't really have the brand that Gonzaga has because Gonzaga has been to Final Fours and championship games.
it is really amazing how good Gonzaga and St. Mary's have come. Gonzaga is a 3,000 student Jesuit school in Washington with no football team. They've
Yeah,
gotten their brand. They're probably in the top 8 or 10 programs right now. And Mike, I think St. Mary's is probably in the top 25. That's an even smaller school in Northern California. And just look at their non-conference this year. They played Nebraska at home, or neutral. It stinks that Nebraska was a tournament team until very late. They killed USC. They weren't any good. They lost to Arizona State. They beat Utah on the road. They lost to Boise State. They lost to Utah State. Like, they played enough tournament teams, but I think that they all kind of ended up below them. It hurts them. Can they get a team on the schedule that's going to finish above them in the seed list? And that's what I'm looking for St. Mary's in the future. But we've got
yeah,
we can do a season recap on them too. It'll be interesting to see where we go with
absolutely.
that. Michigan State, New Mexico up next. Obviously, a lot of news out of the Lobo camp after this game with a couple transfers and their coach going somewhere else. But this was a game, Mike, where New Mexico led at halftime. It looked like that they were going to battle, but Michigan State showed their quality in the second half, that they were the better basketball team. And despite star Jace Richardson going 1 for 10, didn't score until under the last media timeout, Izzo and the Spartans are going back to the second weekend.
Yeah, second straight game of the tournament where Michigan State and Izzo had a very concerning first half of basketball, and it looks like the Lobos are going to have a really good, legitimate chance at winning this game. And first off, kudos to the Mountain West. I don't, they're not going to be in the Sweet 16, but another great basketball season for them. They very easily could have had two teams playing the Sweet 16 this weekend, especially if a travel's
Yeah,
called.
the
But
last
I
New Mexico
digress.
and Colorado State really saved it because
Yeah,
the other two teams that made it were
they blew up.
destroyed. So,
Yeah,
and it's been a tough run of years, other than San Diego State's title run. It's been tough, but
they've
obviously
gotten teams to the tournament, but they've
yeah,
folded as soon as they got in.
but two teams
But
win games this year and come pretty close to getting to the Sweet 16.
great year for the Mountain West. Yeah, because of those. But we'll see. Will New Mexico be able to continue their success without Richard Pitino? We saw he's going to Xavier, and that'll be, I think, a great match at that program. Having the Patinos both coaching the Big East, that's going to be fun.
Yeah,
But yeah, Michigan State was able to power through. Look, we know what kind of team Michigan State is. They're not going to be a good shooting team. They haven't been the entire year, but they're able to control tempo and win on the defensive side of the ball. And they're able to do that. +6 in rebounds in this game, +7 in assists, and they stayed out of foul trouble. And that's at the end of the day. That's how the Spartans got the job done. And they could potentially face their in-state rival, the Michigan Wolverines, in the Elite Eight. Potentially, could
and
happen.
the way Michigan State defends, Mike, it's just not a system that you can get of a lot of assists on. I think they blow up plays well.
Yeah,
It's typically taken one-on-one superstars to beat them. And the way Indiana beat them is they threw it into the post. They had a better matchup in the post, and they didn't double. And Nelly Jr. Joseph, 16-7 here. He actually did have a good game. That is the key to me to beat Michigan State is you have to have a really good post player. Because
yeah,
that is where the disadvantage is for Michigan State. I think their bigs have really sort of taken a step in the right direction this year, especially Jackson Kohler. But still, they are not like all Big Ten caliber or anything like that. But I thought we saw it at points here. Donovan Dent, Nelly Jr. Joseph, good one-on-one players. You could have a chance to beat Michigan State if you can do that. But Akins and Holloman make enough shots to get Michigan State across the line here. All right, we've got 4 games left, Mike. Kentucky beats Illinois. It was one that Kentucky sort of led the entire way. Illinois had a couple of spurts there, but it is the Wildcats who move on to the Sweet 16 in year 1 of Mark Pope. This one really could have gone either way. Both teams pretty volatile, but it's Kentucky that moves on.
yeah. I think from watching this game, my takeaway was I didn't think like as a team, Illinois was not any worse of a team than Kentucky. I think if anything, they're probably a better team. But Kentucky, although they didn't shoot as well coming down the stretch, I think there were 10 of their first 11 in the second half, and they were unconscious. Illinois had a lot of dumb turnovers early and often in this game. They played a very bad game, very volatile Illinois team all year. We've seen it. Yakashonis did not have a good game for the Illini. He only had 13, was 5 of 13 shooting, had a bunch of turnovers as well. He had a really bad game. Ivisic, was able to shoot the ball well, but couldn't play very well in the post. So Illinois, this just was not their game. And Kentucky was able to just make a lot of buckets. They only had 84 points, but it felt like their scoring was automatic for a while in the second half and able to hang on. I think if this game goes another 5 minutes, Illinois has a good chance of winning.
It
I
just
really
seemed
do because Kentucky seemed to run out of steam coming down the stretch, and their lead expanded with a lot of fouls at the end. But
It just seemed like to me that Kentucky was more consistent over the course of the game. Both teams had their
yes,
good periods. I just think Kentucky's bad periods were better than Illinois'. And
yeah,
that's how you win games by 30 and lose games by 30 in the same week, which is what we've seen Illinois do. I think Kentucky's defense has really stepped it up in the tournament. Their scores for both their tournament games have been really good. They play high possession games, so you look at the 75 and not be that impressed. But they played a 68 possession game against Troy, held them to 57, and they held an extremely I don't know the possession count from this one, but it was more than 75. So less than 1 point per possession, both games for Kentucky. That's something that they weren't very good at all year, and it really doesn't matter what you're good at all year, Mike, because we see things can change in the tournament. So far, Kentucky's defending well enough where I think they might be able to win some more games. But
Yeah.
all right, we've got Ole Miss and Iowa State up next. What an interesting one here, Mike. This was a game that Iowa State was leading early, and then like a seriously 16-2 run by Ole Miss to finish the first half. They're up double digits. Iowa State, kind of got buried early in the second half, and a late push makes this thing look respectable. But Chris Beard and Ole Miss roll to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, this was, I think, my biggest surprise and my biggest shock in the round of 32 was this game. I did not look. Chris Beard is a great March coach. We know that he's killed it at Texas Tech, and less so to a lesser degree at University of Texas.
He
And
had he
Arkansas
had it
Little Rock.
going at Texas though. If he was still there, they'd be at the top of the
They'd
sport.
be Final Four championship caliber team. But even at Arkansas Little Rock, he's able to win a tournament game. So I guess that should not have been expected. In Iowa State, they have struggled coming down the stretch. They've struggled to shoot, and they've struggled to not turning the ball over. They actually were +5 in this game in rebounds. They out rebounded pretty significantly, but they lost a turnover battle -7. And that's what you saw on that big run at the end of the first half against Ole Miss. Sean, I will be honest, this result shocked me. I did not see Iowa State bowing out this early, but when you turn the ball over 15 times, all bets are off, even in the big dance.
Yeah, Iowa State just totally lost their identity here defensively.
Yeah.
Ole Miss is a good offensive team, but there's no way that they should have scored 90 against Iowa State. And yeah, you make some good shots, you make some tough ones, but it was an offensive clinic by the Rebels.
In the Rebels, they were 58% from three, so they were lights out from behind the arc. But you also look at how many of those shots were wide open,
Yeah.
right? Guys on scholarship in college basketball weren't going to miss some of those shots. Nobody. So yeah, like you said, Iowa State very concerning defensively, and you can't turn the ball over like that and win.
And it looked like this thing might get to 30 at one point, and they made a couple
Yeah.
shots down the stretch to make this thing look respectable. But this was by far the most lopsided game. I think this was more lopsided than Duke Baylor, honestly. Final score doesn't indicate that. Baylor certainly battled for longer than Iowa State did. But,
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
and we had two great games, Mike, to end the round of 32. And this was probably the game of the tournament, and it was Maryland beating Colorado State. The Terps were down for most of it. It looked like they pulled themselves across the line. Colorado State gets a chance to take the lead. Jalen Lake buries a rainbow three to give Colorado State a 1-point lead with 6 seconds left. But Maryland gets it to their NBA lottery pick, and Derek Queen wins it for the Terps. But what a back-and-forth game here, Mike, before we get to that last play.
Yeah, I mean, let's not take away from how spectacular of a game this was. This was just back and forth. Definitely the best game that I think we've seen in the tournament. UConn and Florida was a fantastic game. That was a great game as well. But this was just unbelievable back and forth. Look, Colorado State's a 12 seed, but this was two good basketball teams. I did not think that Maryland had a particularly bad game in this one. They didn't shoot the ball fantastic. They were bad on the boards. Colorado State was +10 on the boards. But at the end of the day, this was just a great basketball game. And Queen was able to deliver his team coming down the stretch with a made basket, maybe a travel to go with it. I think it was. But regardless, this was a hell of a game, and Queen did make a ridiculously good shot at the end of the game.
This was two top 15 teams playing, in my opinion, and Torvik, you can do, since January 1st, both these teams are in the top 15. Colorado State's actually in the top 10. So they were rolling here, and that's what it takes to beat teams that are rolling. A great play potentially could have gone the other way. Everybody's been getting their takes out. We talked about this on Tuesday with Joe, Mike, and it's not the first time that Maryland's got away with the travel to win a game this year. If you remember what happened at Assembly Hall, that one was that one was 5 steps. This one was 3 plus the gather. I think by the rule it is a travel, but they're just not going to do it in that situation. They're just
Yeah,
not going to call it.
the refs, they don't like to call fouls coming down the stretch. They don't like to call travels. They don't want to be the reason that a team wins or loses a game. You got to call it though. If it's three steps, you got to call
It looks
it.
bad. It looks bad in slow motion.
It does. It does. But like, look, what's crazy? At the end of the day, Colorado State did not shoot the ball super great in this game. They were only 5 of 21 from three, and you argue that they didn't lose themselves this game. This game was tight all the way to the end, and they played great basketball. They just didn't come away with the win, which is disappointing for the Rams. And then the next day they lose their coach to add insult to injury. So got to be a pretty frustrated fan base there in Fort Collins, but a great run by the Rams,
And
nevertheless.
Maryland will see a lot of Nico Medved next year, Mike. He's going to the Big Ten for Minnesota. And just right before we started recording, Colorado State hired Ali Faroukmanesh. And if you remember a famous shot by a Northern Iowa guard against Kansas, that would be the new Colorado State coach in Fort Collins. So
Call
he's
that
out.
upset back in the day.
He is a
like
very
10.
he is a very good coach too, but reason to post that highlight again. That man is leading the Rams from now on, but Maryland gets across the line here. They've had so many tragic losses this year. They haven't lost a game by more than one possession since January 5th, and they haven't lost by more than two possessions since the non-conference. So they're in every single game. The Crab Five, a total, Mike, of 5 fouls between the 5 of them. They're not getting in foul trouble. They're not really ever needing depth, and they haven't.
Defensive team.
They haven't had to yet. And everyone's like, "Oh, what happens if they get in foul trouble?" That hasn't happened yet, and they've played 36 games. So will it happen? Probably not.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the last one, Mike. Oregon and Arizona. Again, another great game if you made it into the 1 a.m. realm on the Eastern time zone. It's Arizona that gets across the line here, 87-83. The Wildcats were leading for most of this one. A pretty impressive push from Oregon to try and get this thing back. They had the ball down 3. Arizona fouled, but Mike, again, like the last game we just talked about, these were two teams that were playing great basketball, and unfortunately, only one of them could win. Caleb Love drops 29, and he's going to get one last crack at Duke.
Yeah, Caleb Love against Duke. It's the enigma, right? But the story of this game, really, both teams played great, but Oregon did one thing really badly, and that was shoot free throws. 12 of 22 from the charity strike in this game. And that's what cost them a bit in the Sweet 16, really, with all intents and purposes. An outstanding battle in what could still be the Pac-12 if we had no conference realignment. This, would have been an outstanding conference matchup we would have seen all season. But, at the end of the day, Arizona gets the job done. Pretty resilient in this game. They were able to withstand a big Oregon comeback. And they're going to have a date in Sweet 16 with a really good Duke team. Caleb Love, let's see if he can have his Duke magic one more time, or if Duke can get its sweet revenge on him. These two teams played earlier on in the regular season with Duke blowing out Arizona. Made us question whether the Wildcats were legit or not. They've certainly responded since then to show the quality of team that they are.
All right, Mike, well, let's wrap this up with a little bit of a Sweet 16 preview. We're going to start in Newark, New Jersey tomorrow, BYU and Alabama. We don't have to go through every matchup here, or every player matchup. We're going to get to all the games, but Alabama 4-point favorites right now. Both teams, BYU certainly playing good ball. Alabama's gotten away with a couple, but who's your pick in this one, and why do you think they'll win?
Yeah, look, BYU's been playing really good basketball, but at the end of the day, I got to go with the Tide. The Tide, they have very similar styles of basketball. I just see Alabama as being quicker. So BYU strength, playing a quick-paced game, Alabama does it better than they do. Alabama does kind of what BYU does, just a little bit better, and so I think it's a matchup nightmare for the Cougars, and I'm going to go with the Tide to roll on this one.
I'm agreeing with you. I think the Tide size inside. I don't know if Richie Saunders is going to get 6 offensive rebounds against Alabama. Grant Nelson is healthy. Amori was really the reason that they beat Robert Morris with the lob threat. And I think BYU is going to kind of play into their hands. And like you said, Alabama's better at it than BYU, unless BYU goes nuclear from 3. But chances are that doesn't happen. All right, we are going to the West region. We've got Maryland and Florida from the Chase Center in San Francisco. Maryland potentially getting away with one there in the round of 32, and Florida also potentially getting away with one there. Mike, this is about as far away from both campuses as you can get in the United States. What are you looking for in this one?
Look, I actually think this is going to be a really good game. This one actually, in my mind, is kind of a toss-up because of Florida. They really concerned me last week against UConn. I think what you look at with Maryland is that they can out-physical Florida, and they can do it without getting into foul trouble. And if they can do that, if they out-physical Florida and they can out-rebound them, which they probably won't. They got out-rebounded significantly by Colorado State, but if they can compete on the boards, they're going to win this game. Um, with that being said, I think Florida's going to be just a little bit too much, but this is kind of a toss-up between two teams. I think this is going to be a really good game.
I think Maryland actually wins the forward battle a little bit here. I thought Florida's forwards were a little bit timid against UConn and Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed and their bigger bodies. And I think Derek Queen and Julian Reese are better than those two from UConn.
Yeah.
So I think advantage Maryland in the front court. And in the back court, Maryland has enough where they can play it close to a draw, I think, with Jacoby Gillespie, Rodney Rice, Selton Miguel versus Walter Clayton and Elijah Martin. I mean, you'd probably give Florida the advantage there, but I think that could be closer than the other one. I think Maryland wins this game, Mike. I'm going with the upset.
I like it. I like the pick.
Even though we both have Florida in the bracket pool, which we are both winning, by the way. The followers are obviously not as much ball knowledge as us, but hey, it's not over yet.
Knowledge that we do. We're an open book.
Hey, if Maryland wins this game, I think we're cooked. But
yeah, we are.
Let's go back to the East region here, and it's that Arizona-Duke rematch that we talked about. And I think that game earlier in the year, Mike, was rock bottom for Arizona. They had been sort of thoroughly beaten by a couple of good teams there in the non-conference. It's a different Arizona team now. Now it's the same players. Nobody was hurt, but they're playing at a much higher level. And I think you can say that Duke is also playing at a much higher level because they lost to Kentucky just before then. They had beaten Kansas and Vegas, but that was so long ago that it's almost as if that it's not like a conference battle, which we'll talk about later, but I don't know if that rematch is really going to come into consideration much. I think both these teams are playing differently than they did back then.
Both teams are so different, Sean. And look, I don't want to take anything away. Arizona has had a incredibly great comeback this season. With that being said, I just think Duke is too much. They've got too much size that I don't think Arizona can compete with.
And Malik Brown is going to give it a go, apparently, too, which only adds that.
And Duke is so deep. They really are. Against Baylor, Cooper Flagg was out for about 6-7 minutes, and they were able to grow their lead exponentially against the Bears with their best player being gone. So, yeah, I think Duke, they're going to roll in this game. I'd love to see it be tight. I think they win pretty easily.
I think it's one where Duke probably just needs 1 or 2 runs to win. Like Arizona can outplay them for 70% of the game, but if they're down 6 at the under 8, like I think they're still going to win. And they have proven that they probably do have the best player in the country. They aren't much worse when he's not on the floor. And I just think that they're explosive. They're too explosive to hold down for the entire way. And as much as it would be great to see Caleb Love take Duke down one more time, I think it's going to be the Blue Devils that move on here. Mike, also, it's in New Jersey, so you would think that Duke would have a majority of the crowd.
Big advantage for
the tickets are really expensive. And usually when you talk about regionals in the NCAA tournament, the reason why that is because the team that everyone thought was going to make it, all their fans bought up the tickets, and they ended up making it. When you can get in cheaper, as if Baylor had knocked off Duke there, then maybe we could have gotten in for a little bit less.
Shoot,
but
I'd be there.
But Duke, to me, I think probably wins this by double digits. All right, we're wrapping up Thursday out west. We've got Arkansas and Texas Tech. Mike, interesting one here. with Aduthiero reportedly available per John Calipari on the Pat McAfee show, I do think Arkansas should be given a pretty good chance here.
I think Arkansas is going to have a great chance to win this game. I'm just going to go with the Red Raiders. I got to go with my Big 12 over the SEC. And I also look, Tech has been very. I don't think they play their best basketball in the tournament. They played impressive ball, but they're progressively getting better. And I think that they're going to be able to match the physicality of Arkansas. So I'm going to go with the Red Raiders to get the job done and end Coach Cal's hopes and dreams of this team.
I'm gonna go with Arkansas. I like the March, like raising their play during March ability here of Arkansas. I think that last game they actually had a couple of bad performances. Adu has been playing great recently. He wasn't very good all year, honestly. You had Boogie Fland, who didn't practice for like 2 solid months, gets a couple days on the court and is pretty solid in their first 2 games. So I just think that it's going to be hard for Texas Tech to prepare because some of these Arkansas players are going to do something that they haven't really been asked or relied on to do for a while. So I'm going to go with the upset here.
I like it.
All right, we got 4 games on Friday, too, Mike, to wrap up the Sweet 16. Ole Miss against Michigan State from Atlanta. Chris Beard versus Tom Izzo. This is one where Michigan State are slight favorites right now, but this could go a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Spartans here.
Me too.
Look, I think they're going to be able to control that tempo and make it slower. They're an outstanding defensive team. I just don't think Ole Miss is going to have the scoring outburst like they did against Iowa State. So I'm going to go with the Spartans to get the job done. Albeit there's probably going to be more Rebels fans there in Atlanta than there will be Michigan State fans.
Yep, I'm going to go with the Spartans, too. It is at the oh, no, it's at State Farm Arena, which is where the Hawks play.
The Hawks.
So we've got 2 NBA stadiums, 1 NHL stadium, and 1 NFL stadium for the regionals here. Lucas Oil's putting a curtain at midfield, and they're doing sort of the half stadium. I've been to a Midwest regional there. It's much better than putting the court in the middle of a football stadium, which they do for the Final Four, but you can see a lot better.
Last time they put the curtain in the middle was the 2021 Final Four. That was a glorious time.
Yeah, and well, they don't have courts on both sides of it like they did then, but it is the same idea. You can still get 18,000 in Lucas Oil that way, I think, and NBA arenas are around then. So I think a lot of fans are going to be in these places. Let's go out to the Midwest, Mike, and we've got round 3 between Kentucky and Tennessee. Kentucky won the first 2 meetings, and the saying is it's hard to beat a team 3 times. The data doesn't really suggest that. About 73% of the time, the team that wins the first 2 also wins the third. And sort of the margin of a couple of these games, Mike, Kentucky was dominant in them. Do you see Tennessee flipping the script and potentially taking the third game here?
I do. I do think Tennessee's going to get their revenge here in the Sweet 16. Look, it's just tough to pick Kentucky in March because of how volatile they really are. That's why I didn't pick them to go far in my bracket, and that's why I'm picking Tennessee to win this game here. I think that Tennessee, look, Rick Barnes' teams typically do not perform up to standard in the NCAA tournament, but I think he's going to get back to the Elite Eight this year with his squad and continue to make Texas fans punch the air that they fired him about 10 years ago.
I'm going to go with Kentucky. I just think that the matchup issues that they pose aren't going to go away unless Tennessee plays a little different personnel. But it seems like Kentucky's defending well enough that they can maybe get away with a bad 10-minute stretch of shooting. But I'm going to go with them in round 3 there in Indianapolis, which it's not all that far from either school. I think it's probably a better Kentucky contingent there than Tennessee, but it's certainly not going to be as much as the second game in the Midwest. There's 3 teams in this Midwest Regional, Mike, which are within driving distance of Indianapolis, and the 4th team is the number 1 seed in the region. So that is why Houston wanted the West, and they're going to be playing Purdue in Game 2 there in the Midwest. They've got 3 teams within driving distance. The committee did not take their demand to go to the West, and they're stuck in the Midwest here. essentially playing a road game against Purdue. Just 60 miles up the road is West Lafayette. You've got L.J. Cryer and the Cougars at 8-point favorites right now against Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn, and the Boilers. But what do you see here?
I'm actually, it's against my bracket, but I'm going to cover my bases and go for the upset with the Boilers here. Look, they've won a lot of NCAA tournament games the last couple of years. They're playing good basketball. They had an outstanding game against McNeese. Nothing's really been close yet for the Boilers, and it's because they're playing probably their best basketball of the season, as I'm sure you've seen, Sean, with your Big Ten analysis. High Point, they won by 12, but to me, watching that game, I felt like they were always in control. So I'm going to go with the Boilers to get a surprising upset over a volatile Houston team right now.
Purdue has actually had pretty solid, points, rebounds, and assists from their role players, which has not always been the case this year. Miles Colvin has been really good in the tournament. It wasn't quite the season that he was hoping for, but he's been really good. So they're going to need that again. I think Houston is going to do enough where they're going to get the ball out of Braden Smith's hands. They're going to probably load up on Kaufman-Renn in the post so Roberts doesn't get in foul trouble. And so Purdue needs, Harris and Cox to hit some threes. They need Colvin and Heidi to play some defense and get some putbacks and maybe make a corner three. And I think the chance is certainly there. If they get sort of the whole team effort they got against McNeese, I think they can compete in this one. Houston's not a team that, well, they are good offensively, better than they usually are, but they're still not elite offensively. Uzan is good, Cryer is good, Sharp is good, and I do ultimately think Houston does kind of win this late, but I think Purdue does compete for most of it and ends up just coming up short. But, all right, we've got one more, Michigan and Auburn from Atlanta. This will be after Michigan State and Ole Miss. Mike, you talked about this a little earlier. Michigan is kind of rolling coming into this one. Auburn, a couple of performances that are not quite up to par for them. It's a revenge game for Trey Donaldson. And Janai Broom versus Golden or Wolf should be a good one too, but interesting one here.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the upset. I'm going to go with the Wolverines. I think right now they're leaning towards playing their best basketball of the season.
Definitely.
Auburn is not. Auburn has struggled, it seems. They, struggled really to put away teams, including Creighton, in March. So, and no team has actually won the NCAA tournament, losing 3 of their last 4 going into the tournament. Auburn did. So I'm going to go with the Wolverines to get the job done. I think it's going to be a really tough matchup. Broom versus Golden, and it's going to be a great one to watch. But I'm going to go with the Wolverines to get it done.
This is one where I think that Michigan can't really let Broom sort of run the show and get 30 and 15.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have to make somebody else do it. Auburn's certainly capable of that, whether it's Pettiford or Denver Jones or Baker Mazzara. They've had a bunch of games against good post players, and the way that they've won those, thinking of Purdue and Indiana, is that everyone else hasn't done anything. Kaufman-Renn had 20-plus in both of Purdue's losses to Michigan. Purdue also did beat them once, but by a lot. But it seems like the way that they beat good post players is they take everybody else away, and I think Broom is just too much for that. So I'm going to go with Auburn. But I would love to see some more Big Ten teams win. It's pretty clear, Mike, that past performance in the tournament comes into play for the committee. And so you're going to want your fellow conference teams to do well, even if they're your rivals, because it could come down the line to benefit you later. So
absolutely.
That is all we have for you today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. A little bit of a longer one here, but thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple days.